Listen to Desert Radio from wherever you are in the world by streaming live on stream.namibian.com.na. Desert Radio, the bold voice.
This is the Bold Voice on 95.3 FM. Now, we were speaking on the issue of a national reconciliation policy, which has been introduced to Parliament quite a few times now. 2020, like I said, was the last time it was rejected by the National Assembly. Left the House divided in actual fact. This time around, Tangeni Yambo from Swanu has brought it to the attention of Parliament once again, bringing it up and asking the House to discuss this, at the very least, seeing whether it will be formulated into a motion or not. We'll still see how we can get to that. But the general issue is that of national reconciliation and whether Namibia has actually even gone through that yet. It is stated in the Constitution. There's a line or two regarding national reconciliation. But what does that mean for Namibia in 2023? We have seen many other countries in the Southern African region, Africa in particular, also go on to a national reconciliation journey, have national reconciliation policies and books and volumes written about that. But what does that have to do with us and for us? To join us on this particular discussion and unpack it for us, we do have Dimbulukweni Nujoma, who does join us in studio this particular morning, and also Kakujaha-Matundu, who is on the line this morning. We're supposed to be joined also by a SWAPO veteran and stalwart, that is Helmut Angula. He, however, he is not available right now as we speak. So just to start us off, of course, good morning to the both of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for making some time for us. And I think, Kai, we'll start with you, perhaps. The importance of national reconciliation has been stressed time and time again by the likes of Tangeni Yambo and other analysts. But just from what you remember, because I wasn't around in 1990, did Namibia ever go through anything related or anything close to a national reconciliation process?
Okay, I think when we talk about reconciliation, I think we need to put it in its proper context, because reconciliation can mean a lot of things, to a lot of people. Now, in the context of Namibia, when we're talking about national reconciliation, what actually do we mean? And when we're talking about reconciliation between who and who? Because as you very well know, Namibia emerged in 1990 from a long war to liberate the country, and also a war which is predated many hundred years ago in terms of the national resistance against German colonialism, and subsequently the liberation struggle against apartheid South African regime. Now, those were political systems. Now, when we're talking about national reconciliation, in today's Namibia, what are we actually talking about? Because there is no longer German colonialism in Namibia, and there's no longer apartheid. So what do we mean? Because these systems, this political system, which existed then and which the Namibian people, resisted and fought against, are no longer there. So who do we need to reconcile with? Do we need to reconcile with the fact that there is no more colonialism in Namibia? Because the German government, which was one of the colonial powers, no longer in Namibia, and equally the apartheid system, it does no longer exist. Now, what do we need to reconcile with? I think that is the basic questions that we need to ask ourselves as a country or as a nation. And most importantly, also, when we're talking about reconciliation, we should, in the context of Namibia, is that we're talking about, although colonialism it does no longer exist in terms of, the German colonial power, and equally the apartheid regime it has got their legacy of these two political systems. Like, for instance, we can talk in terms of, landlessness, poverty, hunger, all these things, which are a legacy of these two political systems.
I just want to bring D in here quickly, Kai.
Sure.
And based on your question, in actual fact, D, I think it was an important question there. Who are we reconciling from? What are we reconciling from? Of course,
exactly.
the pretext there being that there was those two systems, like Kai mentioned. There is a German colonial system that Namibia was a victim of, and also there was an apartheid system that Namibia was a victim of. In 2023, where there is this sort of feel of harmony, unity, supposedly in the country. Who are we reconciling from? What are we reconciling with?
Immediately, what ought to have happened at independence, like some other countries have done, is that they've created policies in which they had to unpack themselves at the onset and say, we've gone through a colonial system, we've gone through an apartheid system, Namibia and South Africa to be in particular, but immediately at independence, how do we move forward coming from this aspect of apartheid system? And South Africa has introduced that commission, Truth and
Reconciliation Commission.
Yes, and it had to address specific issues. One, it needed to deal with the aspect of, are people remorseful of what they have done? Two, those of us who were in Mkondo Sizwe in the ANC, what party did we play, or what part did we play during this process? Now, you would realize that under the SWAPO, in the SWAPO camps, in the 70s and 80s, a lot of atrocities were done. So when we speak about national reconciliation, it's not just between the black men and the white men who had an apartheid system, but it also had to deal with people who were targeted as people who were sent and labeled as spies. That is why that you find that in the 80s, there was a parental committee of concerned children who are detained in the SWAPO camps. Now, unfortunately, when we decided to have a national reconciliation policy after independence, all we did was enact this thing in the constitution, where it says that it allowed those that had positions, for example, white compatriots who were in the country, to carry on after independence. That is why you even find, I think it's Article 140 that reads to say, when whatever laws that were enacted before the independence of this country shall remain unless changed by Parliament. So is that the reconciliation that we're talking about? So it's some sort of brush thing. So reconciliation for me is very important, because when you find that these people that we are dealing with, that comes from, that we subjected to many things in during the war, but there has never been a process in which people were told that let us deal with these aspects. This is the way forward for us to move as a country. And it has been a heated topic even after independence, of which the charismatic leadership of Sam Nujoma did not allow any of these discourses to come to pass. Now, we are now dealing with a traumatized nation. We're now dealing with a nation that is full of hate. If I come from a house of somebody who was detained in those SWAPO camps, my view and policies of where this country is going is different from somebody who benefited from the system then. It is the same thing that I was looking at a clip on YouTube where people are talking about the scars of slavery and whether, as black people, have we genuinely dealt with those scars? Somebody now says, Dimbulukweni, you're just 31. What are you talking about slavery? But if my family has undergone slavery, you must remember that there's an economic exclusion that has taken place on the onset. And nobody has even come to us and say, how do we then deal with that aspect as we move towards finding a new Namibia and also resolving those scars with people? So the challenge really with reconciliation as we speak now is that we hardly are even somewhere. But because of what we have done with the constitution, people have assumingly said that, no, reconciliation, we've dealt with it. But today, and even last night, I was engaged on a WhatsApp conversation with people who are saying, look, you've changed your stance because whites took our land and therefore we must go there with guns and take our land back. But is that the process that will get us to the ultimate Namibia that we want? I don't think so. But should we enact policies that enable us to go and return and recover that land, and not just recover it because we want to drive AMGs and we want to say that I have a piece of land called a farm, but to be actually productive in becoming a self-sustainable country?
Kai, I want to bring you in here, and Dee, spoke about the issues. I knew you couldn't hear him for a while. We're just trying to connect to Helmut Angula, who did just speak to us now and said he can't get through to us because there's a strong wind disturbing communication where he's at. But in any case, to come back to you, and it's the same thing that we spoke to with Dr. Yambo when we had him on the line earlier this morning. He said there's so many aspects when it comes to national reconciliation generally, especially regarding that policy that he speaks of. He says that it's not only reconciliation between black and white, but also reconciliation between us black people together. There are those conversations about the dungeons and the Swapo dungeons, yes, and all of that, and also just the civil wars that we had between tribes in this country, the Namas and the Hereros, for instance. Do you think that in 2023 those conversations are still relevant, because there is now a generation or maybe two generations that have no idea at all on what happened pre-1990?
Absolutely. It is still relevant because there is a foundation. We cannot, when we're talking about national development, there must be a foundation on which to build this. And part of that foundation is the history we come from. And now this history is the history of colonialism, apartheid, and so on. And national reconciliation has got many different contexts. There is a political context to it, as the brother has already pointed out, where we were fighting not only the white colonialism, but also during the process of our liberation engagement. Also, there were internal strife within our liberation movements, and which drove a wedge between brothers and brother and sister. And one is not sure to what extent we've overcome this, because there's still this schism between, the various, ethnic groups because of that history of apartheid, which was about divide and rule. And then, besides the political context, there's also the economic context, like I pointed out, because we are talking about land hunger. Where does this land hunger and land poverty come from? It comes from, because people who were dispossessed of their land. Now, in order for reconciliation to really take place, these issues must be addressed.
Indeed. And Dee, this is where I want to bring you in, actually. Yes, there are issues that need to be addressed, but from what you studied, from what you read, from what you've seen, is there a will, especially when we talk about the issue of apartheid? Yes, there's still, the other issues that we must speak about, but apartheid in particular. Have you seen a will? Have you read a will? Have you experienced a will from, the previously advantaged, so white people who are willing to speak on the issue of reconciliation? Is that something that's possibly a reality in Namibia?
Well, with
okay.
regards to white people, there's two aspects that I've engaged a few whites the past 3 months now, and you begin to see that there's even division amongst the white people, because there were white people who were sympathetic to black people, and they were an outcast to this true whites. Because remember, even the whites were divided between the English and the Afrikaners. Now, even the Afrikaners treat themselves more superior than the English because of those many conversations that they have. I, for example, have a friend who now, during these field fires, can't be assisted by fellow whites because he's married to a black woman. So there is a specific part of the white community that sympathizes with black people and understand that, look, what has happened is not really just, you can't just brush it off by just simply saying, okay, we are sorry, we understand. But there must be a process. Now, what is that process that we must get to? It's how do we move from point A, where first is to accept. And once we accept what was done is wrong, we find modalities to accommodate one another and say, this is what we've done wrong. This is how we are going to amend the wrongs that we've made. That conversation is very clear from any black person and every white person, irrespective of whether they are hardcore Afrikaner who still believes that black people are less superior. I mean, they are inferior to them. But there is that connection from that aspect. The challenge that we are facing currently is dealing with the black on black, and particularly what has happened in the dungeons on the story around the liberation struggle, because that is the core of why we are unable to move. And that is why you would see that majority of people who then feel, and now I'm beginning to understand after I've read a couple of times now, that the reason why you'd find that the minority of the tribes in the country, when they have a view on SWAPO, they have a view on Oshiwambo speaking people, is based on what has happened before independence. Because it doesn't matter whether they were present or not. Because when they go and have dinner at home, what do you think their father is going to say? It's going to narrate the stories that their grandfather has spoken about, narrate stories that others have gone through. But because majority of the people who were seen to be sent were from the Ovaherero community, the Damara speaking community, the Nama speaking community, the majority, the Nano Shiwambo and other minority tribes. So when you find those aspects there, how do you expect these people, even after independence, and people were saying, let us just have an inquiry. Let's open it up. Let us deal with these aspects. Let us deal with the traumas and emotions. Until today, the 1974 group that is claimed to be the Shipanga group, majority of them who are still supporters of the SWAPO party, are unable to find closure. What do you think happens at those dinner tables? That is what we are speaking about with national reconciliation. And it seems that it has now created another new elitist politics where us who were the beneficial aspects of after or post-independence, we must continue the status quo as is. But we must never be concerned about what is happening with others. So it's deeper.
I want to bring in Helmut Angula here, who has managed to join us on the line this morning. Good morning to you, Dr. Angula. Thank you so much for making some time for us. And I just want to bring you in the conversation. We are speaking to Kakujaha-Matundu and to Dimbulukweni Nujoma here. You were around in that transition, from 89 to 1990 when we became an independent nation. The pretext of this conversation being that there have been many disagreements between people that were in Namibia at the time. So there's German colonial Namibia, there's apartheid Namibia, but even in between that, there are also, civil wars between Namibians themselves, Namahereros. And of course, there's that conversation that even within the SWAPO camp themselves, there were people that were not too happy with themselves. The issue of national reconciliation, was this ever a priority for the SWAPO government, especially in those early years?
Yes. Thank you for having me. The issue surrounding reconciliation was one of the most important elements that the Central Committee of SWAPO last meeting in Luanda before returning home was addressed. And this also was not solely the invasion of, yes, SWAPO has the idea that we have to prevent national conflict, configuration, civil war, intestine war, and that can not come about if all the inhabitants can accept and acknowledge what happened in the past and decide, make a decision to forgive. That was also the policy that was advised on by the Council of Church in Namibia. It was very strongly urged that SWAPO come out openly on the issue of reconciliations with the belligerent parties, with which party was the parties that was working together with foreign occupation forces, and in particularly the white community of Namibia, who were deadly scared to remain under a black government, which they, of course, seen and characterized according to apartheid propaganda as a communist government rather than anything. There was also an urgent advice and counseling from the United Nations organizations and its affiliates organizations to divide Namibians, and particularly the parties to the conflict and to the agreement that they have to consider seriously the issue of reconciliations. It was on that basis that it was agreed that the belligerent force, they integrate, that SWAPO fighters integrate with their SWATF, South African police, and the integration was carried out successfully. It was also on that basis that there were no white exodus leaving Namibia because of the promise that nothing will happen to them in terms of retaliation. Remember, just at the beginning, before the organized elections, there were a lot of white living. And during the election time, many of the white community came back from South Africa to come and vote because the uncertainty surrounding the would be outcome of the national of the outcome and the constitution thereof. So yes, negotiation was greatly achieved, but. Yeah, well, you can't satisfy, obviously, everybody.
There seems to be a bit of disagreement with that, Angula, and I'll tell you why. As we speak now in Parliament, there is a call for a national reconciliation policy. That call was made in 2020. It was rejected by members from your party. Throughout the years, there have been a call also for a national reconciliation policy and or action plan. The two gentlemen I have in studio this particular morning say that, not much has been done in terms of a national dialogue on, what actually happened in apartheid in the colonial times. It seems that this reconciliation that you are referring to was merely a decision by, the SWAPO members and colleagues at the time, and it wasn't that much of a national process. Would you not agree with that?
What? Yeah. There is maybe it's a misinterpretation, misexpectation. What is that what they foresee was to be reconciliation? Reconciliation means the belligerent parties sitting together. The national assembly that draw up the Constituent Assembly that draw up the Constitution of Namibia. It's a product of reconciliation. Yeah, the SWAPO sat down with the party that were opposed to independence and agreed. So reconciled. They will reconcile. And we came to agreement and adopt a constitution at the shortest, most possible time that surprised everybody. So you can't say there was no reconciliation. If people are talking about just theoretical talking, which is not backed by any practical means or imagination, that some academics sit down, try to explain what reconciliation. That's a different thing. That's not reconciliation that is to be achieved after a war. Reconciliation achieved after war, it means that former Belgian parties sit on the same table, make laws.
I just want to bring in. I want to bring in Kai here. Kai, you hear that Angula saying that reconciliation was achieved. It has happened already in Namibia. Just your response to that.
Absolutely, I would agree with him in a political context, because what does reconciliation mean in a political context? It means, two former warring parties or organizations, ceasing hostilities and being able to work together in terms of, steering the country forward. That has happened, as Tate Angula pointed out, in terms of, there was a constituent assembly, people, hammered out a constitution. Yes, in a political context, it has worked. Even, post-independence, there has been hardly, civil strife in the country. There has been peace and stability. Yes, in a political context. Yes, reconciliation has worked. Also, as he pointed out, in terms of the integration of the former two parties in terms of arms, they have been integrated in one national army. Yes, it has worked. And that is in a political context. But as far as I'm concerned, reconciliation cannot only be seen purely in a political context, and that is finito. No. What about the economic aspect of it? That has not been realized. And personally, I must admit, I'm not aware of any national policy, reconciliation policy document. Perhaps it was a conceptualization by the SWAPO party in terms of ideas, but is there a document that one can refer to as a national reconciliation policy document? That does not exist, but because that document does not exist, it does not mean reconciliation does not exist. But most important to me is that political aspect of reconciliation is only one aspect. The other aspect being economic aspect. And when you're asking, somebody who has been dispossessed of his land, he's landless today, there's land hunger in the country. What should somebody like that coming from that background reconcile with? With his landlessness, or what should he or she reconcile with?
Dia, I'll bring you in here as we are winding down our conversation this particular morning. You were shaking your head there when Tate Angula was speaking. Your brief response to that, I'll give you a minute or two.
Yeah, I think he speaks to Article 141, that for us to have harmony in the country, let's not remove and unplug all the white people who are in charge of administration. But after an electoral process, they can be assured that there's still safety for them to deal with that. That we agree with, it took place. But it didn't go deeper because it's just on face value. And that will always forever be a SWAPO argument to say, yeah, well, we brought people who were fighting with at the table. Today you have freedom of speech. We're able to do that. But that is not the essence of reconciliation. The essence of reconciliation is for people who did you wrong to admit that they've done you wrong. A conversation must commence to say, how do we recorrect the wrong that we have done? And that is why when you look at even the CCN, for example, at the early days when people were speaking about genuine reconciliation with the detainees, CCN sided with SWAPO. And they said, oh, wait, let's take a seat back. And that is why the international, this Red Cross Society had to do a study and some sort of framework for them to work towards. Why is it that even at the early days of independence, there's that breaking, I think the silence movement or breaking the wall or silence of wall movement, something in that line was formed. So these are things that took place as a result that the essence of what people expected to happen did not happen. But we must also not be taken out of context to say that nothing has happened. We understand the difficulties, for example, for a new government, but the new government must also accept. Now, you must understand where we are coming from.
I just want to bring Tate Angula here. See, we're running out of time a bit. Tate Angula, so the essence here of the two gentlemen's argument is that yes, something has happened on the ground, on a political level. There is reconciliation, but on the ground, in terms of, on a social level, Namibians still feel like nothing has happened in terms of reconciliation. There hasn't been a conversation between various parties that were not, on good terms pre-1990. And that doesn't only have to do with black and white. That's also, tribe to tribe, culture to culture, whatever it may be. That on a national level has not happened. And the fact that there is no policy on national reconciliation is indicative of that. And in actual fact, like I mentioned, your party has been very, very resistant to a national reconciliation policy on its own. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, my response is that just mixed up things. Reconciliation at political level has been achieved, but economic parameters have not been part of the reconciliation as constituted by those who were there. That was not the issue. The issue of economic reconciliation had to be addressed within the economic policy framework. And our economic policy framework has introduced the element of having a dual economy, both private and public. It means that the state and public enterprise can run economy parallel to the national capitalism. So it's been agreed to, and that's what's happening. It's not effective. Not achieving the balance of income. So we have to think now what other key methods can be introduced to address this issue. It has nothing to do with we have not achieved reconciliation. On the issue of discussion in the past, we in SWAPO have made it clear that we really don't think it helps anybody to start for the skeleton in the cardboard. They say, hey, I admit I killed this one and I was hurt by this one, and this one was killed by this one. Those revelations, or how do you call it, they happened in South Africa. South Africa better governance. We have suspicion in South Africa. It's up to you to decide whether the South African, whatever they call it there, is a better social condition than ours. I don't believe so. This is South Africa. Still have got people being burnt alive, people being killed at random. Yet they did have whatever they call it, when everybody was crying and revealing. We don't think that is. So some people, through their, maybe they have not think out clearly what the magnitude can be. Do you imagine that if your neighbor actually come out crying that he was reporting your father and your father disappeared forever just because it's your neighbor, and your neighbor is still your neighbor? What good does it give you?
I'll end up with this question. I'll end up with this question. Angula, end up with this question because we are running out of time. When I spoke to Dr. Tangeni Yambo earlier, he suspected that maybe, just maybe, the SWAPO-led government and members of parliament from the SWAPO party do not want to discuss the issue of national reconciliation because the SWAPO party themselves might have things to hide. And he made that conversation in context with the allegations that have been thrown against SWAPO when it comes to the SWAPO dungeons and all the violence that was, suggested or seemingly to have happened by the hands of the SWAPO, the SWAPO-led movement at the time. I'll give you just a minute to respond to him. Is this the case? Is this why the SWAPO party does not want to speak on the issue of national reconciliation?
He thinks so, but that is not restricted only to SWAPO. SWAPO lost hundreds and hundreds of cadres, murdered, some of them thrown from the aircraft into the sea, some of them poisoned, some of them hanged, and they were reported to by their own neighbors, by their own friends. So it's not only applicable to SWAPO that SWAPO has got somebody to hide. We also have to cover those people who are in key position who are on the other side. They were made the decision, and some of those decisions, they remain in the archive, both at home and in South Africa, as to who was responsible for the killing of that SWAPO member. We're not interested.
Angula, I do have to end the conversation here. We have just run out of time, but I do appreciate it so much for making some time for us this particular morning. Same with Dee, same with Kai. It's been, a conversation that I think we still do need to unpack. We'll probably have a part 2 of this and try and see how we do unpack this. It's going to Parliament shortly with Tangeni Yambo again. We'll try and, sort of force the House to discuss the issue of a national reconciliation policy. But to the gentlemen, for your time this morning, I do thank you so much. It is 9 o'clock and we do have to shut down and end off breakfast in the desert this particular morning. It's been a pleasure being in your company, especially for those of you who have joined us since 6 o'clock this morning. We'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same place, 6 to 9 on 95.3 FM, 105.6 in the northern parts of the country. A very good morning to you.
Listen to Desert Radio from wherever you are in the world by streaming live on stream.namibian.com.na. Desert Radio, the bold voice.